So, hello, Dr. Jimi Woolumbin. It is my great pleasure to be here with you, having this conversation with you. I love talking with you. I love what it is that you do in the world. And it just felt so right to be able to ask you to speak with me about healing and art, because I feel like you straddle those worlds in a very unique way, healing and
Oh,
art.
it's my absolute pleasure to be here speaking with you as well. And as I think I mentioned in a fireside conversation with you at a previous time, is I often feel that the best conversations that I have where I learn the most about what I do is not with other therapists, but with artists. And it's only in those conversations with somebody who is uh, deeply immersed in a poetic basis of mind, which is what so many artists are. They have a poetic basis of mind that that the kind of dialogue about what I do feels like I gain more sense about it. And so otherwise it feels like the technicalities or the science of medicine is what gets discussed. But the art, you know, with a capital A, you know, the great art is always what artists seem to teach me the most about.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to reflect a moment where you feel that's dropped in for you in conversation with an artist before? Just
Yeah.
one time?
So many, you know, that speaking with my wife, who's an artist, once, I remember just looking at a piece where she had used charcoal. I think it was a charcoal sketch of someone, and I said, I just love the way you've captured the light in that person. And she said, oh yeah, the trick is you don't capture the light; it's the darkness that reveals the light. You know, it's just the shadows, and the light is what remains.
Mm.
And then and that just felt like a statement that psychologists, therapists, and every ensouled human being can actually immediately relate to, regardless of whether or not they've ever picked up a piece of charcoal and attempted to sketch somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's enormous amount of that. And actually, when I say artists, you know, it actually probably extends further. And anyone who's very, very deep in their own art, whether that would be something creative like, you know, pottery or dance, or whether that would be someone that was a marathon runner or a mountain climber, or I don't know, a translator, anyone that's gone profoundly and deeply into their passion,
Mm-hmm.
then the principles behind that, they start to transcend disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
and they start to just speak to the Tao, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the great unfolding of soul and the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess really it's just anyone who is truly and passionately immersed in their life offering, really, then they are an artist of kinds, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this beautiful quote that I don't know who it's from, that I came across a little while ago, that all true art is a kind of compulsion, you know, that a madness, an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly feel that with my work, that it's what I do on the weekends. Not the worky part of it, but that just the equivalent of the joy of picking up a guitar and, you know, just and hearing its melody is, for me, will also be the textures and tactile kind of beauty and aesthetic of skinning some bitter oranges, or sitting down and just reading, you know, ancient Greek philosophy and how that relates to the Hippocratic tradition.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've had so many questions come to my mind just as you've been talking right now. But firstly, just for anyone who doesn't already know, I believe you are a herbalist, but I also know you are other things, and I know that the myths come into what you do in your work.
Yes.
So how does that go when somebody meets you for the first time and they say, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Then I get that look on my face that you probably get as well. It's like, so you're a singer? And you say, yes. Either you say yes and politely leave the conversation there, or you stumble around through a longer conversation about the very different, the many different mediums that you delight in, and in exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself as well.
that was that was a sense of light.
Well, is that what it was?
Yeah.
The darkness reveals the light. We're
Yeah.
just
That might happen again. Might be
yeah,
the saying.
great. It'll bring us back. It'll keep
Yeah.
everything like present and real.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it as divine editing.
Yeah.
If you just disappear and go black
Okay.
from so yes, I delight in herbs. I really do, and they're one of the areas that a lot of people know me as Jimmy the Herb Guy. But a Paracelsus quote is that in the hands of the master, the medicine becomes as putty. And so this is saying that when previously some people would say, what do you use that herb for, right? What do you use
Mm-hmm.
chamomile for? And when you ask like a native healer about that, then it's just like saying, what do you use alia for? It's like, well, like, what do you use Jimmy for? It's like, well, Jimmy is my friend. Jimmy has all these qualities,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in relationship with Jimmy. I'm in relationship with chamomile, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore it has this plasticity to it. I can utilize it in all of these different ways. And herbal medicine then is one of the mediums that I can use plastically, like use creatively like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so is touch, so
Mm-hmm.
is body work. It's a deep love and passion. And so is acupuncture, and so are words.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the area that I have the greatest affinity to, or where it's moved towards for me as a therapist, is less about medicine. I guess where this discussion comes is, what is medicine? What is
Mm-hmm.
a medicine, right?
Right.
What is a medicine? And I delight in medicine. And for me, plants aren't medicine, but they contain medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Body work can unfold medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Words can contain medicine. And so does sunsets, and so do lovers' embraces, and so does heartache, and so does betrayal, and so does cancer. They contain medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And my love is of medicine,
Mm.
really, and that perhaps is a sub-love that is subsumed underneath the greater love of soul and wisdom,
Mm.
of here. And so then, yes, yes, anatomy and botany and all of these pieces and psychology are
Mm-hmm.
a delight in, but they're leading towards something.
Mm-hmm.
They're tools, they're mediums for our soulful unfolding and whole making, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a question around what makes you want to help other people in those kinds of ways, and is it
Mm.
also growing you at a soul level? As you are
Yes,
offering medicine to another, are you simultaneously growing?
yes. Well, in a conversation that I had a little while ago on this subject matter with my apprentice, her name is Miriam Latif, and she's an amazing herbalist. She's qualified, but we're going through a formal apprenticeship that's about 18 months in at this point. And when I was speaking in a somewhat verbose manner about all of this, her reflections afterwards really captured it beautifully. And she said, or she wrote to me, that the world is crying out to be healed through us, not by us, right? And so I think that the medicine path is primarily a personal path. It's primarily a path of one's own soulful unfolding in the world, in the same way that the artist doesn't primarily express themselves and do their art for their audience. They primarily do their art because they must. They just must. They must
Mm-hmm.
paint, they must sing, they must dance, they must.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they go crazy. And so I think the the mycelial fruiting, the mushroom of therapy, of where a client comes to see me, is a very small part of my art,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the rest of it, below the forest floor there in the darkness, is really about me healing myself, me exploring myself. And so I think that it's what you were saying, but it's even more so in a more exaggerated way. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
all about me. It's all about me and my relationship to soul and the cosmos. And then at times I share that with others and the experience that I have in there, right?
Mm-hmm. And so do you feel that artists should take on a similar approach and do what it is that is for them, rather than trying to bring understanding or, resolve conflict or those kinds of
Yeah.
approaches?
It's a great conversation to have, and it's a tough one, uh, because in continuing my thesis here, my perspective about this, it could be misconstrued as to be promoting self-absorption and narcissism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like it's all about you, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not where I want to encourage people, because our hi, our world and our culture is. I could actually see this beautiful outline of you in the darkness there. It was very beautiful. Our world is self-absorbed in all of the wrong ways, like a sort of small s self rather than a large S self. Um, so for artists, I think that in order to in, in order to really have that satisfying experience of having created true art, of the experience of that, uh, of when one knows that moment was real,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what's captured in it, but the moment of the art was real, then that has to be about the artist and God, if those are words that
Mm.
resound for you, the artist and their soul, the artist and the world's soul, perhaps. And I think if we when although there's a place for making art political, I
Mm.
want to get everyone to be more aware of the environment and change their recycling patterns.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very much a place for that, and I support everyone wholeheartedly who's doing it. I think ultimately art transcends such smaller motives,
Mm-hmm.
and the true art that is genuinely transformative comes from a relationship not between in a desire to fix and make the world whole, but in a desire to come into a relationship with one's own brokenness and one's own wholeness, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
from there that transformative work with depth
Mm.
unfolds.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage people, you know, even the Greenpeace artists at times, just to put down that agenda
Mm-hmm.
and to dive as deeply as possible just into the sanctity of that experience between
Mm-hmm.
you and whatever the other the world
Mm.
soul is, you know.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So what comes up when you express that is this feeling of, well, if you were to really dive into that level of mystery, let's say, then you definitely can't guarantee that it's going to land in the world, be received, be appreciated, make money. There's actually no
No,
guarantee if you really
no.
surrender into that mystery space. So I'm curious about how that's been for you across your journey of, yeah, opening to soul or to God or to that style of communing, and I guess the letting
Yes.
go of the definite, this will definitely work out, this will definitely be a career, because there must have been times where
Yeah,
you didn't actually know if
there's
it was going to
a
land.
lot,
So
so much.
how did you deal with those moments? How did you stay on path?
Okay, good. So there's so many things I want to respond to there. So I'm going to come back to my own path and going off trail. I'm just going to park that for a moment. I just want to say about coming into a relationship with the mystery, that my concern is that what I have said then becomes kind of spiritually exclusivist towards
Mm-hmm.
artists and healers alike, about only the mystically inclined can have this experience. And that's not what I'm saying at all. You know,
Mm.
soul is right there in your anger and your rage, in your impotence, in your grief and your sadness, in your grayness and your bleakness. Like that those things are themselves a portal into mystery. But I do want to make sure that what I was saying is inclusivist. It's here for all of us. All
Mm-hmm.
artists and all therapists can have
Mm-hmm.
access to this process that I'm talking about. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a transcendent experience for the Hildegard von Bingens of the world, or the Himalayan yogis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first point.
Mm.
And the second one is about the path, and I have certainly followed my path with for the most part without thought or recourse towards its career potentials.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that I've just studied myself, and I've studied in other countries, and I've pursued knowledge and passion wherever
Mm-hmm.
it's led. And it means that I actually I'm not qualified in just about anything that I practice properly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, or the way I got qualified was unusual. I am
Mm-hmm.
qualified. I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, but I didn't go through the universities
Mm-hmm.
to gain that qualification. I went through apprenticeships. I
Mm-hmm.
wriggled my way into exchange programs in China in a Beijing hospital, and did internships there.
Mm.
I sat and had a little old guy in Bondi Junction who didn't speak English instruct me, and it did not seem like that was going to lead to a piece of paper. It really
Mm-hmm.
didn't,
Mm.
and it did. And then other things haven't led to a piece of paper. All my studies in Ayurveda or in all sorts of other different
Mm-hmm.
areas. So I have chosen. I've chosen to follow the bright spots,
Mm.
to follow that sense of to follow the muse,
Mm-hmm.
right? When
Mm-hmm.
there's where is it? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
where is it alive? And
Mm-hmm.
I have followed that, and I guess that's the Joseph Campbell piece, the follow your bliss
Mm-hmm.
part,
Yeah.
that he reframed at the end of his life as follow your blisters,
Mm-hmm.
right? Underneath criticism. And so I would like to say that I have followed my bliss, but there has been an enormous amount of discipline and an enormous amount of blisters
Mm.
along that path as well. It hasn't been just kind of butterfly like
Mm-hmm.
inside that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a somewhat unfulfilling answer there, Jimmy.
I don't feel unfulfilled. I feel to just presence where I am right now, and I feel like I'm inside a bit of a blister, you could say, because the
Mm,
light is going off every 10 minutes, and somebody just came through the space, and I think there's actually a kids hip hop dance session about to start just over there. And so I
gotcha.
could have the moment right now of like, this is all wrong, I'm in the wrong
Yes.
place,
Yes.
and as I'm having those kinds of feelings, you're talking about how it's okay, it's there in the anger, it's there in the grief, it's there for everyone, the
Yes.
soul is there for everyone. Is there soul in this strange space I am in right now, in between somebody working over there and other children playing and dancing over there and lights turning
Yes.
off? Is there still soul here, or is this a dead zone?
I would like to suggest that soul is most often in the greyest and the bleakest and the blackest and the deadest places, and the art of alchemy very much affirms this as well, is that living in a concrete jungle is a place that is soul making, is that soul is I mean, it's a very difficult subject to describe and to define. It, like all deep things, it eludes any definition, right? It's the best definition. It is a definition in itself,
Mm-hmm.
but it is informed by an exquisite sensitivity to suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and it is in relationship to mortality, but also morbidity, right? Soul music, right? It's like without suffering, without slavery, without inequality, without hunger and deprivation, you don't have soul music, right? You know, like think of all of those, that exquisite yearning that comes through the blues and through soul and through all that sort of stuff. It comes from living in shitty boxes where the lights are just mostly out. So yes, I think soul is there with you right now, and that's why I said that we need to have a very inclusivist attitude towards soul, and anything else is unhealthy. And that's one of my big problems with spirituality today in the new age and the framing we have. There's kind of materialism, and then we've got this spirituality which sparkles and glitters and transcendent, and doesn't include all sorts of things. It doesn't include our angst and grief. It doesn't include things like masturbation. It doesn't include boredom. You know, it's you know, it looks like a particular Facebook meme. You know, there's rainbows all around goddesses with sparkles on them, and that's what is not material, is that thing. But soul, rather than spirituality, is here in the world. It embraces all of the grit, all of the grime, all of the awkwardness and vulnerability. You know, the silences. You know, and the grey rooms.
Amazing.
And I think it's very, very necessary for us as a culture in our process of healing to start to come to be able to broaden our palette, to be able to become literate in the language of soul and art, wherever a culture first grapples with something new or with something very ancient, which is brought back to the surface, which is then something new again. It's not intellectually, it's through art. It's through an aesthetic appreciation of the right brain says, it's like this. It creates a metaphor. Consciousness is like an ocean, you know, the world is like a wave, you know, what's happening across the world right now. Capitalism is like a bushfire, or, you know, like there's a metaphor that's attached to it, right? And that's why artists are so crucial for the health of our culture, right? Is that they say it's like this, and for us as an entire culture, there's a big part of it which is soul. What is soul like? We don't have that lexicon anymore. You know, what's it like? And we need 1,000 artists with spray paint and plaster and you know, warehouses and voice and spoken word to bring us back to what's it like again?
What's soul like?
Yeah, what's it like, this being human? What is soul like? Because those images on Facebook, you know, or Insta, those chakras all alight and all that stuff, aside from making me nauseated, you know, they're incredibly superficial and they're very exclusivist. There's a lot of humanity and a lot of life that is not welcome there. It says, oh, that's all the shit. That's shit. This is the thing that goes above that. You know, and I think that's just more polarizing. You know, our world is so polarized, you know, men versus women, left versus right, materialism versus spirituality, you know, matter versus spirit. There's all of these things that seem to sort of tearing us asunder. And soul and art, heart, beauty, these things soar above language, right? They soar above language. Even good spoken word soars above language, right? And then in doing that, it brings those poles back together. It brings us back to the axis mundi, you know, the central axis there. And I think that is what soul is. It's one of the what's that soul is the axis around which this great drama kind of unfolds.
Thank you, Jimmy.
I can hear your hip hop class in the background.
Yeah, I know, you know, and
let's
I'm
include
here,
that, shall we?
And I'm wondering, like, you know, how do you stay in contact then with soul when something is actively kind of distracting and taking away? And I'm kind of excited about people watching this back and going, fuck, I can't hear his words. I want to be able to hear what he's saying, but there's this hip hop class going on. And also then embracing the preciousness of the messages that you're passing on right now. I mean, I could move, but I'm rolling with this. What's opened up?
Let's stay with it, because I think, sitting with the discomfort is often a portal in itself, right? The edginess, you know, and actually it's one of the things that I love deeply about you, and not just professionally but personally, that you're very happy to use to speak the unspoken and to make the discomfort a portal, right, into intimacy. That's what's so incredibly disarming. Yes, is that through the vulnerability of that, of just like, of naming. Actually, I'm in this funny cubicle and hear these guys, and this is not the chakra. I'm not having the chakra image of the conversation, you know, or that this was going to be. It was always, you know, for myself, I wish I had a glass of wine and a feather boa and a large cigar whilst we're bohemianly unfolding soul, you know, like, and you're in a piano bar, but we're not, and you're in a cubicle, and there's people in the background.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of where I am, I'm actually in like a storehouse right now. I'm in a storehouse of, you know, vacuum cleaners, and there's a toilet lid just over there. I could show you. I could spin it around and show you. It's amazing.
Spin it round. Let's bring the shadow out from it. Let's see just reality for a moment. Look there. So beautiful. So beautiful. Isn't that great? The behind the scenes. Suddenly we've done the podcast no. You know, let me, I've got to do it as well. Look, here, I've got this slightly carefully curated little bit over here because there's stone and it feels like, well, this is very Jimmy, this is on brand, and there's green and stuff. But I'm just out the front of my house. Look at my place. I'm just sitting in my garden, you know, that's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, you know, what a beautiful little metaphor for so much of what takes place here, you know, that's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Jung loved alchemy, right? Is that the imagery that he found in alchemy, compared to the language of psychology, right, which is very abstract, very heady. You know, the language of psychology is just like neuroses and complexes and, you know, all these sorts of things, right? Projections and stuff. The language of alchemy is a language of life. Oh, look at that blue that wow, the colors as you walking through. That was incredible. Wow,
this is amazing.
We should have done this ages ago. This is exactly where we should have. Wow, and here we are. Suddenly, we're in life. And it's so much more interesting, the actual life, right?
As you were saying.
As I was saying, so in alchemy, the one particular take on it is that that is the art, capital A. That's what they refer to it as. They didn't call it as alchemy, but the art, practitioners of the art, right? The art with a capital A. And the art is, through this narrative, it's the art of soul making. The great work, the magnum opus that is referred to, is really the alchemist's journey towards soul and towards wholeness. And so it's done through a medium with, you know, chemistry and all this sort of stuff. But really it's very much a personal process according to the way in which Jung and everyone in this tradition see it. And what they're doing, the reason why Jung loved all this is it's like, wow, this is life. They weren't just, this is not just bad, this is not archaic chemistry. This is the language of soul. And what you do is you take the primer materia, you take your starting material, your basic material, and then that basic material is whatever you have at hand. In a way, it's your own history of sexual abuse. It's your poppy outy ears.
Mm-hmm.
It is, the weird relationship you've got with your mother, or your compulsion for cigarettes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your starting material.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to take that, and you got to do all sorts of things with it for a really long time. You've got to potentially burn it and burn it and burn it and burn it until it's a blackened shell of what it once was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to start the process off.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to put it in the furnace, and putting it in the furnace is this. There's a certain amount of activity behind that. There's this fire as transformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point you got to just drown it. You got to just put it in a vat of your own tears, and it needs to. The container is very important. Is it, what sort of container do we have? This container here of a podcast medium through this, or is it the container of a loving relationship? Is it the container of the back alley behind a club on a Saturday night? There's all sorts of different containers, right? And then you got to ferment it and rot it and ferment it and rot it for months and months and months. That's what you're doing as an artist. You're fermenting and rotting and burning out.
Mm-hmm.
And the burnout is not to be avoided. It's a part of the art. You can't start the good stuff until you have taken the primary material, your starting material, and you've really reduced it to ashes.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, then you've got something.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start to work with it. There, you've got the essence of it, right? The form and the narrative and the stories have kind of been burnt off.
Mm-hmm.
So, without trying to dive into alchemy, all of that language there is something that I think is very encouraging for, I don't know, people running podcasts who don't have professional studios, as an hypothetical example, starving artists that are trying to find their voice, or all that sort of stuff, and therapists alike. It's just like, well, is it welcome here? Is this stuff welcome here? And as a therapist, there's very much there's a therapist role, posture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here it is. I'm in. And how do you feel about that? There's particular things that are welcome
Mm-hmm.
as a therapist. That means being professional, right? And there's particular things that are not welcome. And in one regard, that's necessary and appropriate, and that's about creating a container. But what's not welcome has a tendency to come out in kind of weird ways. And that's the same also for artists or for people making podcasts. I think it's possible that the shittiest thing about this particular interview is going to be the best thing about this particular interview. It's the way in which you turned the camera around, then you got up and moved. I think that's probably going to be the gem inside here, right? And that's the same with your art. It's like, oh shit, now there's a coffee stain on it.
Yeah.
And actually that's it.
Yes.
That's soul. It's real. It's alive.
Yeah. And maybe that's the same for our lives.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly out. Any other vision which we all tend to have. Like the romanticized vision of here's my life and then here's all the shit. Right. And so alchemy is one of the central maxims is in Latin, in sterno vanquillis, I think. Forget that. It means in filth shall it be found. In filth, in the piss and in the shit, in the menstrual blood, in what has been discarded, in the old tampons, in your deepest shames, in in the quiet, ugly moments, in the boring, funny little rooms, in the in all of that stuff. It's there that art is found. It's there that soul is found, not in the postcard, the romanticized vision of it. That's this weird little part of our life that's not really life.
So I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing this amazing invitation to burn the thing, to to douse it with time, to ferment it, and then to have the beginning place. And so I guess what I'm really curious about is, what do you do with all of that stuff? Do you just say that was part of the process and I'm not going to share that with people? Do you then start again? Or do you share part of that gunk with others? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. So the premise is, what do you do? And first off, I just want to say, I think perhaps the question is wrong, or it needs to at least be challenged there. And that the question is, how do you be with all of that? It's a very different question. And I think for the artist, for someone on a journey of healing, which is all of us, then the question for our culture is so much, or so often, what do you do? What do you do? How do you fix? What do I? We're human doings all of a sudden, and a bunch of the time, that's a kind of heroic ideal of trying to vanquish and make gone, or to leverage. There's something happening there, and it's not about how do I come into relationship with it. And so, imagine my client whose 11-year-old boy drowned, and his father was taking him through a river at that particular point, and the child drowned there, and now that man is here with me, and and it's years later, and we're talking about his health and his soul and everything. The grief that man has is not something. It's like, what do I do with that grief? Like he's asking this at some level, right? And the question is not broad enough. It's like, how do I come into relationship with this? How do I be with all of this? And I think that needs to be our first question always. Like, how do I be? Who am I in relation to this? And my role is not to try to even if he comes in and says, listen, Jimmy, I want you to make my grief disappear, and he asks me that, it's my deep obligation and my art to say, no, that grief is a sacred gift from your child and from life. That's the source of art and soul, as tragic as it is. And it's not for me to vanquish it. It's not a dragon to be slain, right? It guards a treasure. It's to be held. It's to be sung. It's to be wept. It's not to cripple you. It may lame you slightly, but not to cripple you. You have to come into a way that you can move with it. It's not exactly the question you asked, but there's an answer.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious because artists are putting out material into the world. They're putting their primary material often out into the world, and I am not sure necessarily what they're seeding, what's being seeded through what's being put out into the world. So I see, that you go back to the old myths a lot
Yes.
for their wisdom and their integrity, and they're intact. I guess you could say.
Because they are medicine.
Yeah, because they're medicine, that beautiful word again, because they are
Yes,
medicine, and it's clearly
they are.
medicine.
Yes.
And so for us to be able to create medicine that is made by the people today, for the people today, it seems like it's a decent amount of deep work. It's a deep journey, isn't it?
Yes. And the goal, if the goal is to create medicine, then you've lost already.
Okay, go on.
I think that it's It's a seeking of medicine. And it's the seeking of medicine because you're in relationship with your own brokenness, your own smallness, your own tragedy, you know, your own pettiness. It's because you are all of those things, right? And so to seek to save the world or express something for the world.
Yeah.
What are you giggling at?
I'm giggling because my friend Compost here, I'll show you because we're just being really real.
My friend too.
Your friend
Our
Compost.
friend.
Our friend Compost.
Wrong, not pronoun. Wrong, something.
Just completely
Our
jumped.
friend Compost.
He didn't realize I was sitting right here, I think.
Okay.
So you're in the middle of a vital point about not seeking to create medicine, but seeking to experience medicine.
So that's there's a trick there that is a trap for art and for all those practicing the art of soul making in whatever way they do that. And you don't have to be an artist or a therapist to be practicing the art of soul making, right? Everybody is. That's the great work. So everyone is an artist, right? And everyone is a physician, because a physician is from the Greek word physis, which is the same word as that physics comes from. Is about, it means nature, but by nature it means something more like reality, right? And so it's somebody that is studying the cosmos in some way, and we're all studying the cosmos. So we're all physicians and we're all artists. The trap that I spoke of is when, let's speak about artists. When you seek to so if the trap for a physician is to try to set disease up as the enemy to be vanquished, right? Which is how our culture practices it. Then you're lost from the outset there. We can come back to why. But for the artist, in seeking to change the world, to express something for the world, to touch and move people, I think you lost at that point as well. Not that those aren't worthy goals, but you won't be able to come to that place when that is what is motivating you. You won't be able to achieve any of those goals when those goals are themselves the motivation, right? The motivation is, like, what am I feeling? What do I need? What is the medicine? What's, and it's an outpouring, right? It's for your own sake. And it's between you and not the market, not your audience, not your critics, and not anything so small as the political regime that one is trying to change in terms of the great work, right? Because it's only at that time when we're at our edge, when we're at the edge of soul and soul making ourselves, can we really tear something open and stick our arm into our chest and pull something out, right? That others will be touched by. And it wasn't for them, it was for you. It wasn't for them. Anything with depth was for God. It was for you. It was for soul. It was because you had to. Is if you didn't get that out in that way, then what were you going to do, right? The side effect, like I said, the side effect of walking the path of medicine is helping others. I think there's a good case always to be made for the opposite of everything that anyone says, and so that's also true. But the side effect, art is the side effect of an artist's life. How about that? yeah, it's not the point itself. It's what it's pointing to. There's a process that one comes into relationship with, and it
Mm-hmm.
has to be about the process. And that
Mm-hmm.
process, I think, is a mode of being and a way of life. It's a path to walk, and it
Mm-hmm.
can't get boxed into like with medicine, pills. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's medicine. Here's art inside that frame or that particular recording, or
Mm.
you get my point? Am I
Yes.
making sense, or am I just ranting? Be honest with me here.
Art is a side effect of living as an artist,
Yes, of the artist's way,
of the artist's way
perhaps,
of being.
and
Mm-hmm.
only when the emphasis is shifted like that, right?
Yeah.
That helping others is a side effect of, you know, getting your own oxygen mask on, of
Mm-hmm.
just sharing. It's like, well, I don't know, man. I certainly haven't figured it all out, but in wrestling with my own grief,
Mm-hmm.
in wrestling with my own ugliness, my own pettiness, in wrestling with my own deep desire for acceptance and for love,
Mm-hmm.
in coming into relationship with the dark and shadowy depths of my desire and my lust, all of that. It's like what I found is this.
Mm.
And so, and it's sharing. It's somebody who's walking the path, sharing that, and that's how I see the best of my work. Really, obviously, I need technical skills
Yeah.
for things, but
Yeah.
those are easily gained, or
Yes.
relatively, compared to the very human unfolding of
Mm.
that can't be put into a curriculum so easily.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's what the myths speak to
Mm.
so often.
So I'm curious about the seduction along the way. The seduction of, if you just, do this in the way that it's already being done, you'll reach the market more clearly. Or if
Yes.
you just, be a normal or, normal, proper doctor, then
Yes.
you'll be a billionaire. All those
Yeah.
different seductions along the way. If you just, create the abstract art, don't make it too weird, then it'll sell at a corporate level, and all
Yes.
those seductions. And I think that's actually like a daily kind of part of it, is to stay on path, stay in relationship with the thing that you really want to be in relationship with,
Yes.
amongst all of those seductions. Do you agree? Do you feel like there's
I,
checkpoints regularly?
the seduction is very real. The seduction or the temptation. I'm not sure what the right word. I'm not sure either of those words are right.
Okay.
But uh, it's a mirage, because soul is incredibly elusive, and where uh, we see it beautifully in Zen Buddhism, where like there's a koan that doesn't really have an answer, and then after years of sitting with it, one of the apprentices, when asked, what's the sound of one hand clapping, then he puts his sandals on his shoes and walks out of the dojo, or the temple, and the master just you know just kind of weeps. And then the next week some other knob gets up and puts his sandals on his shoes and tries to walk out, and the master beats him with a stick of compassion. It's just like that that's crap, man. Putting you sandals on you, what the fuck was that about? you know it's like, oh, but he did it. It's like, no, that was now it's dead and gone, and that's not it. And you just trying to pretend to do something random is not going to hit it either. And
Mm.
you just sit there with it. And so
Oh, it's so
that
harsh.
it's right. So if I was able to, if I had this incredible technical expertise and I was able to produce the best forgery, the reproduction of the Mona Lisa ever, what value would it have? Not a lot, really. Some value, but in terms for artistic value, kind of none at all, right?
Mm.
If you perfectly reproduce anything,
Mm.
you know, it's not there anymore. Is the point? Is that soul has fled, and so
Mm.
this is the strange job of of art, is that it is soul is managed to be captured in one moment, in an expression, in a symbol, somewhere, in a story, in a metaphor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then but that metaphor always, just what it did was turn the gaze. It pointed towards something
Mm-hmm.
where an inner stance, right? An asana of soul is engendered through that particular metaphor, that particular piece, that particular idea or expression.
Yeah.
That religious truth, whatever it was, right? But then it was always a signpost, right? It was never the thing. It was never actually the moon. It was always a finger pointing at the moon. And then at some point, all of those signposts all end up kind of, they end up, they've got a life cycle of their own, and soul has fled.
Mm.
And so if I were to sit here and say all is one, nobody's going to be very lit up by that statement. It's a signpost, and it was once roaring and alive and full of soul, and it pointed the gaze somewhere. And now it's dead. It's a shit stick. It's the Buddha on the path. Kill him. Punch him in the face. If you see the Buddha in the path, punch him in the face. He's a dried shit stick. He's nothing at all, right? That's what the Zen tradition teaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so as an artist, if you see Michelangelo on the path, you're not on the path. If as a physician you see Paracelsus or Culpeper on the path, it's not your path. You're not on it anymore. There's a sense of like Joseph Campbell, this is all sort of Joseph Campbell kind of stuff, right? That if you can see your path laid out before you, it's probably somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
And the sense of unless there's brambles, and unless you feel kind of somewhat, lost at times,
Mm-hmm.
Inside it all, then you're not really in the artist's job of reaching down into the slime and into the muck and into the darkness, into the shadows, to bring forth the truly primordial, that which, because there's no new art, to bring forth the truly ancient in a new way or in a new time. And only in those moments have you actually done art. Have you had the fulfilling experience that you yearned for anyway?
Mm-hmm.
And that have you got something that's like, oh, soul is in here.
Mm-hmm.
And it won't, and for a while, there's a period of time that soul is there, For me, the Mona Lisa doesn't speak to me very much at all. I think maybe her time has fled as well.
I have a couple more questions. I mean, I'd like to speak to you about these things for the rest of our lives. And I hope
we will.
that we do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just anchor in with what they are. So one of them is about the phenomenon of the need to heal. So is this, in your opinion, as a therapist, as somebody who's interacting with a lot of people, very intimately, working with their ailments, let's say, physical and soulful ailments, is this a modern phenomenon, or is this just how it is being human? Do you feel like this need to heal was always there, or is it more present now?
Good question. I'm just going to go with an answer.
Yeah.
And kind of commit myself to that as though I believe it.
Okay.
And when actually good questions, they really have a great number of great answers that contradict each other as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go with an answer to such a great and worthy question. And I'm going to say that that we're living in a very, very particular point in human history. It's very hard to see, when your nose is against the billboard, right? But the sense that there is, did I disappear that time?
Yeah.
I did.
Good to see
That
your
was,
face.
I'm on 20%.
Great, let's do it.
Yeah. The sense that there is something wrong, that it wasn't meant to be this way, that the stories we've been told don't match up with the world as it is, that our culture in some fundamental way has sickened or twisted or stunted or paused or something, is a common feeling across an enormous number of people.
Mm-hmm.
That we're living in the decadent end of the Roman Empire, as it's just declining down, right? This, when we look at the environment, when we look at, I don't know, our education system, our political system, our economic system, fill in the blanks, our military, like there's a range of bits and pieces that you could pick your
Mm-hmm.
favorite ones there. And there's so many of them. You say, well, we don't just have an ecological problem because all the solar panels in the world are not going to make our culture more sustainable by itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The way in which we treat our environment is reflective of a deeper problem. And same if we changed our economics. It's like there's this, and so in the context of that, right, of an enormous, what's the word I'm looking for here? A disenchantment,
Mm-hmm.
an enormous, so many people in relation to either society and our culture, or potentially life and nature itself, because some people are disenchanted because they're inside an atomic reductionist Darwinian, it's kind of pointless, just a speck of dust in an infinite meaningless universe that is constantly trying to destroy us, So there's a range of people that have got a disenchanted perspective here, right? So this incredible disenchantment, one response to that is to try to make it better, right? In the context of that is to try to make it better. And I think that's a complex that's a complex response that should be supported and lauded, and should also be questioned quite deeply, because in trying to heal others, in trying to save the world, in trying to fix the broken man or woman or fill in the blanks human being that you are in love with and whose potential you see, there's something laudable there, and there's also something that is kind of dangerous as well, right? That it needs to come back to coming into relationship with myself. And so we are each desperately in need of our own whole making process, desperately. And I think perhaps at the moment, I don't know, it's hard to say anything about this. It's hard to say anything about where the world is at the moment. As soon as I want to say something, I see how untrue it is. There was a point in there. Did it?
I'm hearing
Did I
that
manage to?
you're saying that we should still come back into the relationship with the self rather than trying to fix the world. But yes, there is a sense of disenchantment across culture,
Yes.
and what I'm understanding is you're saying come back to the self. Don't try to fix everything else around you.
And that if there is then
I missed that line.
If there's a chance for us to save the world, if the saving the world is one, necessary, and two, possible, right? And I'm not quite sure whether it's necessary and whether the world needs saving, or whether it's possible. So but let's say that there is, then I believe that if that's the case, then the best chance lies in a culture emerging of individuals that have come into a deep relationship with their own brokenness, their own fragmented nature, their own shadowiness, their own selfishness, their own rapacious, consumptive kind of desires, that they've come deeply into relationship with that.
Mm-hmm.
not come deeply into relationship with a corrupt, weird body like Monsanto, or, fill in the blank, some other evil empire that you've kind of have identified. Is it's not fixed there, right? Which is where we tend to do. I'm going to make art that's going to influence people there, political parties there, countries and cultures and corporations out there. That if the kind of cultural renewal that is required to create sane institutions, sane corporations, sane governments and economic and environmental policies and everything else, medical systems included, has to emerge from individuals that have taken an enormous amount of their gaze into where the origin of that problem lays. And so on my own midlife crisis silent retreat last month, one of the things that came to me was this: I am all that is wrong with the world. And I don't mean that in a self-flagellating kind of a way, but I mean that, well, it's very much here and alive within me. It's very much here, and it's not just like, oh, the world is fucking with me. It's just coming in, and I'm just, otherwise I'm all right, but it's just, there's all these bad influences out there, throughout my past. It's like, well, all those gods and goddesses from the myths, and we haven't spoken about them much here, but I assume you will have spoken about it in other conversations as well. But that whole pantheon, you are Hecate. You are the Gorgons, you are Medusa, you are also Apollo, shining, bright, civilized Apollo, right? You're all of them. You're all of them. And how does one come into a relationship with the dragons and the nymphs, the beastly and, the transcendent, You are the war god.
Yeah, and I feel to say as well that how we come into contact with all those parts of ourselves has to be as well through interactions with other humans. And, it's not just that we're in our own,
Yes.
studios just figuring this shit all out. It's
No.
It's through the living, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the risk of everything I say leading, like Joseph Campbell, whose incredible work got distilled in our culture to follow your bliss, therefore I should be even more narcissistic than I was before, right? Obviously, if his grand contribution landed there before he was even dead, then my halting diatribe here is going to very easily land into the same hole of just like, oh, well, Jimmy, you've emphasized self inside a selfish age, and everyone's already just, so what is my dream, my contribution, my soul, my self-expression, and you're saying more? Like, give me a break. It's the last thing we need more of. It's like, yeah, man, I'm with you. That Dr. Jimmy guy, I don't know what he's fucking talking about. I'm with you. That's right. We do need, it's in relationship. But life is paradoxical. And so I've emphasized one little part of the story here,
really
to make one point, and its opposite is deep and profound and true.
Yeah.
It really is. And yeah.
Thank you, Jimmy. Yeah. So you've spoken to one aspect of a great sea of creatures.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And I have one more question for you, which is a question about what are the, let's say, contemporary artists and stories that have moved you, that feel like they've got the good stuff in it, where you've had a moment of, coming closer to your own soul through interacting with those artists? If
I
any
guess,
moments.
I'm, for the last, I don't know, maybe it's only 5 or 6 years or something really, that I've been living in somewhere around the 6th, somewhere between the 8th and the 4th century BC Greece, overwhelmingly. So my exposure to contemporary anything is very, very limited, is what I have to say. My exposure to anything now the Great Woolumbin firewall kind of keeps me in this funny little bubble that I exist in. And so I guess what has been touching me has been our myths, has been the stories of Persephone, for example, and these Hadean forces that just erupt from the surface and from the underworld and then consume her, and she feels raped by them, right? And this thing comes out of me and my life and drags me down into a sort of hellish underworld, and I feel kind of violated almost by my own experience of puberty, by my own body. Not it's not a literal rape. The rape of Persephone is not shouldn't be literalized and genderized in this way. It's the primordial, the way this stuff comes up and plunges us down, and she starts off as Cora, the nameless maiden, and every psyche and every soul is the nameless maiden. In some traditions, we say you don't have a soul yet, you haven't made it, it's not there yet. You have to sweat and bleed and chant and sing and dance it into being. And it's through that process and of eating of the fruits of the underworld, when Hades gives her a pomegranate and she eats, it's through that, through whatever the underworld is there for you. And there's a world of possibilities of that. It could be something obvious like BDSM, or it could be something a lot more, a lot less obvious, like just some aspect of your professional work, that some ideas, right, that you've just for some people it could just be going to Burning Man, right? You've eaten of the fruits of the underworld. And then the nameless maiden, the soulless one almost, right, she who has not yet made her own soul, becomes Persephone, the queen of the underworld. She inhabits that domain, the chthonic, the dark, the shadowy, the place, and she spends half of her life, and she can never again dwell solely with her overly attached mother, Demeter, on the surface of life. That's beautiful, and she spends half of the year there with the flowers and the orchards and all the stuff, but she's never going back. She must spend half of her life below the surface from that point. It's stories like that have touched me deeply over the last little chapter of my life.
That's where you're anchoring to for now.
For now, that's where I find
muse.
myself. Yeah, that's where my muse has led, and I'm sure she will flee from there soon enough. But for the time being, it's the bright spot that, and once it was herbs, and once it was muscles, and once it was acupuncture and Ayurveda, and once it was all sorts of places, and this is where I find myself now.
Yeah, and then somehow they end up connecting up together.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I think that the medicine path, you have to learn the technicalities of how do I stretch serratus anterior, and what amount of ginger should I combine with echinacea so that I don't scorch someone's mucous membranes. You have to learn those technicalities, and it actually takes a really, really, really long time. It's like scales and stuff, right? There's a lot of that. And that there's something that I can never remember about the process of becoming a bard. It's so much more beautiful than I ever managed to do justice to, but it's said that in one of the bardic traditions that you spend 7 years, the first 7 years studying music, and then you spend the next 7 years practicing music, and then you spend the final 7 years making music. And at the end of that 21-year apprenticeship, finally, you can play music.
Amazing.
And on the medicine path, I'm just in my 21st year, as it happens.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know what that means. I don't want to overstate it, but I am seeing that there's a lot of scales
Mm-hmm.
And at each point, there's a sort of sense of like, well, I've got it figured out now. Like I was a master of 3 years into the whole thing in my own mind.
Yeah.
But it's a long alchemical process, a lot of sweating, a lot of fermenting, a lot of rotting, a lot of burning, drowning, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where I find myself now in discussions like this. This is for me now, the bleeding edge of medicine is here in this conversation with you. This is where my art fruits. It's not in a SOAS release or, just a particular herbal formula. Those things are mediums towards soul making now.
Okay. So then I want to ask you, in what ways has this conversation moved you? Like, in what ways is this alive for you?
Well, when I sat down and I did this exercise of which I'm a little chagrined about, because now I find a slightly funny exercise of trying to define my mission in life. There's something quite heroic about that. Da, 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 da! Jimmy's mission in life, but there's a dangerous thing to reduce one's life to a definable mission statement. So I'm not sure how I feel about the exercise or whether I recommend it. But when I did that a little while ago, what I came up with was to sing the mystery, and that whether it's with a client or a lover or in a podcast, that I feel like my deepest calling is in these dialogues where we use words to come to the end of words, and then we can both just sit for a moment by the lily pond and stare, if not at the moon directly, at least at the unfettered and shimmering reflection of the moon. And in this conversation together, then I feel like there's certainly times when we're both seeing, when we're looking deeply at the lily pond, and for that I'm truly grateful.
Thank you for saying that. And for me, the lily pond was actually the toilet seat in the room that I was in before.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it was like admitting this is where I am right now,
Yes.
and the kind of
Yes.
the shame, and the like, oh God, they're going to think that I've got nowhere else I could have gone, and
I'm not
look,
a real podcaster.
But yeah, turning to face the toilet bowl was my moment.
Yeah, beautiful, so rich, right? Such a precious parable inside there.
Yeah, thank you.
It feels like we've come to the end of our time.
It does, yeah, it does.
There's a natural punctuation point.
Yeah, I just want to speak again to this space of the muse and the following of the light spots. Is that what you said?
Well, the bright spots.
The bright spots, following the bright spots of the muse. And then also you've spoken time and time again across this last conversation about, and I haven't actually got the word that you've said, the practice, the work, the rigor, the technicalities. That's what you kept saying, the technical skill.
Okay.
Technical skill and the muse.
Yes.
And so giving them both.
The blisters are necessary. The techne is necessary.
Yeah.
And but that is subsumed inside art, the great art, and the art of soul making, that we're all engaged in this, the great veil of soul making, the life that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And to remind ourselves is like, yes, the blisters are required, and those technical capabilities are very much necessary in any discipline.
Yeah.
But our culture is starting to forget what they are in service of, and we very much need those people that can again and again bring it back raw and bloody and sweating and quivering for us in whichever field that is, and remind us, to make it a lot, to make the truly ancient alive and new once more.
That is a great last sentence. Thank you so much, Dr.
It's an
Jimi
absolute
Woolumbin.
pleasure.
You're a wonderful
Yes.
human being. I love you very
Thank you.
much.
And you.
Thank you.